And this morning we've got a distinct pleasure, a longtime friend of mine, one of the smartest folks I know. He's passionate. When he gets involved in something, boy, he does deep dives, and some of us just kind of catch on to the edges, the fringes of what he's doing. Scott Schang, findmywayhome.com, is with us. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Ron.
So I see your latest endeavor. I mean, I one back or two back, I did get involved a little bit in the Helpers Act. That was those of you that heard us talking about that. That was all Scott's doing, and we've been doing some work lately on student loans. And Scott, you've really dug into this one, and you're deeply enthralled and entrenched in knowing what's going on. And I saw something. The end of this month is a big deadline on this. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So, part of the COVID debacle, March 2020, when the CARES Act passed, homeowners had the opportunity to opt into a forbearance program that temporarily stopped their payments until we figured out what was going on. But for 49 million Americans, their student loans stopped becoming due. They put it into what was called an administrative forbearance program, which means they just stopped all payments being due in March of 2020. Well, it's been 3 years now, Ron, and families are. We've got all the reports. They're increased their credit card balances. They've increased their car loan balances, increased their mortgage balances, and they've spent all that money, and nobody's been thinking about that student loan payment. Well, on September 1st, statements go out. October 1st, those payments are due. So the light switch for student loan payments is being flipped on.
That's a pretty interesting concept, because that's going to really affect a lot of people. And I know that the conservatives in Washington say it's going to be inflationary if they were to give that money back. Being the money's already been spent, I don't see how it's inflationary, because it's not going to be more money going into the economy. It's more money going back to Washington, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's going to, at least, yeah, the federal student loan programs, because we're only talking about federal student loans here. The private student loans, which is a whole nother issue that we definitely need to discuss, they only make up less than 10% of all of the student loans. So yeah, interest will start accruing, and they'll start generating, government will start making, generating interest revenue. But yeah, for families, there's been a couple of reports out. Morgan Stanley put out a report. It basically said that only 24% of people think that they can make payments without not paying something else. So it's going to be a huge, huge impact. As a mutual friend of ours likes to say, most families have an expense pie. And, you've got a big portion of it for your rent, your car payment, your credit cards, your standard of living. There isn't a whole lot of room, especially with inflation on just cost of living expenses. There isn't an extra few $100 up to $1,000 left in most people's monthly expenses. And that's where the challenge is going to come in, is when this thing comes due, it's like, nobody likes surprises, but this is going to be the surprise that keeps on giving, because that $300, $500, $900 payment is now going to be due every single month, and you've got to completely rearrange the way that you're balancing your family budget.
Well, and the other part of that is that we don't save anything, so it's not like people have that extra money, right? It's not like they're taking, okay, I know that my student loan payment is going to be $1,000 a month, and I've been putting it into a savings account.
No,
because we've noticed that savings numbers are not growing.
No.
So we know that people aren't saving for this expense that they've incurred. And you made a comment there, 49 million people having student loans. And the last numbers I looked at, there was about 165 million workers in the country, something around that number. So that's like 1 out of every 3 or 1 out of every 4 people are going to be affected by this, and they don't have the money to make this debt payment.
No, an overwhelming, I don't know what the percentage is specifically, but a lot of them are in public service, right? And they're, you know, they're not, these people, a lot of people don't make a lot of money. When you look at salaries versus student loan balances, so many people are getting out of school with these huge student loan balances and they just don't have the salaries to back it up. So no, this is challenging. There's good news though. I mean, the good news is being educated about it, is being informed and knowing about it. Nobody likes surprises. We can handle what we know is coming down the pipe. And there are solutions, and I appreciate you bringing this to the surface, because this is kind of this is a bummer segment, Ron. Why are we talking about our expenses going up? And but there's a silver lining here, and the silver lining is education and empowering yourself to make proactive choices to put yourself into a better situation, and understanding the pitfalls and the dangers that are out there that surround this topic. And I think when you educate yourself about those things, being in our business, we need to educate our consumers about it, because consumers, they learn about this stuff through clickbait headlines in the news. And how how accurate news headlines are. They're not. They're clickbaity, and they cause fear and they cause panic, and every time the administration comes out with something, then the next day there's something pulling it back. And the same thing is happening around student loans. So it's a complex web that is about to be woven, and it's going to impact like you said, it's going to impact a lot of people, a large number of people, both working and not working. 49
well, the beauty
million
is that we can at least and I appreciate you coming on, Scott, because as long as I've known you, and so it's quite a number of years, you've spent your career dealing with educating people on all different subjects, and this one is a big one. And one of the things we're going to talk more about this, so maybe some case studies even, where you can actually look and see what people are actually doing and how you can save some money. I'm going to, Josh, if you would put on there the link, rsrstudentloanhelp.com, rsrstudentloanhelp.com. It's a great a great resource, a place where you can actually go and get an idea. Is there help for you? And the topics, the things that you're going to see here, rsrstudentloanhelp.com, those are things that have already passed Congress. It's not something that the president is proposing and then the courts are going to rule down. These are things that are already law. Go to rsrstudentloanhelp.com. Scott and I are going to come back and chat more about this. I'm going to continue our conversation this morning. Scott Schang, findmywayhome.com. One of the best mortgage educators I know, or housing, I guess not mortgage, housing educators, because Scott does so much more than mortgage. Housing educators. And today we're talking about student loans, and there's a big crisis when you start looking at an issue that 1 out of every 3 or out of every 4 people are going to face. And I'm going to submit very, very few are ready for it. And the reason I say very few are ready is because we see what the savings rates are in this country. We see stats, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I recently saw a stat about how if a family had a $400 unexpected debt, a car issue, a tire issue, they couldn't make that payment. They couldn't come up with that money. And it was a huge percentage of the population. And now we're looking at a 1/3 or 1/4 of the population that's going to have this massive debt. And I'm going to share one number, and I'm going to let Scott go from there because he's got so much more knowledge on this. I went and put a close friend of mine, their information. I went to rsrstudentloanhelp.com, rsrstudentloanhelp.com. I put in their scenario, and it takes about 30 seconds. So I put in that they've got a income of $72,000. They owe $90,000 in student loan debt, family size of 1. I didn't know their interest rate, so I just put in the average of 6.5. Their payment is going to be $1,004 a month. It could be $334 a month. if they were to go based on the laws that are out there right now. Now, because I lead a lending company, a mortgage company, that equated to an extra $90,000, $88,000 in purchasing power for a new home. Those are some staggering numbers, aren't they, Scott?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what you're talking about is income driven repayment programs. There are multiple income driven repayment programs, but when somebody comes out of school with student loans, they're automatically put into a fully amortized payment, which is, if you're a homeowner, you have a mortgage, you're familiar with amortization. You make the same payment every month and it gets paid off after 20 years, 30 years, something like that. What you're talking about and what I think we're trying to build awareness for is you may be eligible for a payment that's based off of your disposable income after all of your living expenses based on your family size, as opposed to just a blind calculation off of that's meant to pay your loan off. Because most people don't know that actually every single loan program or student loan can be forgiven after 20 years of on-time payments, even if it's an income-based payment. But more importantly, there's a lot of public service people that qualify: teachers, your police officers, people who work for the county, the state. They can have their loans forgiven in 10 years. And a lot of them are making an income-based payment because they don't make a lot of money in public service. Nobody's getting rich in there. They've got fixed salaries. They know what, they know what they're getting for trading their time. And like, that's the solution. Like, that's the very first thing that people should be looking at, is those income-based payments. Which, and I don't know if you want to get into this now, but this brings up the private student loan scams that are out there, that anybody that's paying attention to this, be careful about emails that you get from companies offering to refinance your student loans. The scenario that Ron talked about, getting them from a $1,000 payment to a $300 payment, that's not refinancing their loan. That's just putting them into the right program, the right repayment program, so that they can qualify for the lower payment. But private student loans, once you get tricked into a private student loan, and these companies are so bad, they're banned from Google from running ads to consolidate student loan debt. So what they've resorted to is they're paying certain companies like NerdWallet and emails. They're sending out emails. And Ron, we've got a scenario that both you and I know about. County worker, worked at the county as a psychologist for 7 years. She panicked. She had $300,000 worth of student loan debt. Panicked, responded to one of those debt consolidation emails. She has a $4,000 payment now when she would have been eligible for an $1,800 payment, and had all of her student loan debt forgiven in 3 years. Now she's stuck with a $300,000 loan and a $4,000 payment for the next 20 years or so, maybe 30 years, and she can't get out of it. Like, she's landlocked. She's not going to be able to access the equity in her home. She's not going to be able to refinance. And those are the kinds of things that consumers need to avoid. And if you're in a position where you can, like, if you're a mortgage professional, real estate professional, this is an important bit of information that you should be out there talking to your clients about. Not only is it going to help them with their family, but like Ron said, and we had another story the other day, they were able to afford $120,000 more home. It was a first-time home buyer, young millennial family. They were able to qualify for $120,000 more just by getting into the right repayment program. Nothing else changed.
So one of my favorites, Scott, was actually a fraternity brother of mine. We went to college together, 200 or 300 years ago. And after college, he just made the decision that he was going to go into the military. And he spent 25 years serving our country, but he still had student loan debt from before he went into the military. He had taken out loans at where we went to school, and came out, retired about, 6 or 8 months ago. And when I sent this email out, He says, I retired after serving our country for 25 years, and now they're telling me I have to start paying my student loans back. And I put him in touch with our friends over at LoanSense, and they're the provider behind rsrstudentloanhelp.com. And they said, no, he's served our country for 25 years as public service. That his student loans are forgiven. And, he had no idea that was the case. And probably, most people don't even know to ask the question.
Right.
That's the whole thing, is you got to pose these questions. And I'm thankful that Scott brought this mission to us, that we can try and educate people on what's really going on out there, because these are not the handouts that we keep hearing from Washington. These are things that are already passed into law. And I mentioned in the last segment, you may not have been with us at that time. These are already part of the law, so you don't have to worry about it getting clawed back. The Supreme Court said in their ruling that the president's forgiveness program was unconstitutional. It wasn't that he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it without Congress, right? The things we're talking about are all things that are done through Congress, signed into law by whoever the president was at the time. And Scott, I think you had mentioned that there was like 10 or 11 different income-based programs or repayment programs that are all involved in this. Is that something accurate?
There's 4 or 5 programs, but there's one that's been revised 3 times, and that's the new SAVE plan. But there's SAVE plan, the pay plan, the IBR plan, the ICR plan, and the IDR plan. They're all kind of just different calculations based on where you work, what your family situation, what your income situation is. But the new program is actually really, really encouraging. And this entire process has caused a close look at how the student loan payment infrastructure is designed, and they're fixing a lot of stuff. So there is a lot of good stuff coming out of this.
Sounds good. We're going to talk more about all these different plans. We're not going to get into the weeds and the details of them, because in 30 seconds, you can find out what might be available to you. We'll talk about that when we come back. Continue our conversation this morning. Scott Schang, findmywayhome.com, is with us. We're chatting about student loans. And, I sent out a lot of messages about student loans, and I had people say, well, I don't have any, or the people that took them out should pay them back. That's not our issue today. If you don't have student loans, my bet is, and I'd bet my neighbor's house, somebody that does. A child, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, a friend's child. Because when you're talking about an issue that affects one out of every 4 or 5 people in America, somebody with student loans. Now, would you recommend to them, hey, something, your tax bill right now is $1,000 this year, but I think you should go ahead and pay $2,000. Would that make sense to you to make that recommendation? Or go to this tax preparer and they can show you how to pay more in taxes. Would you make that recommendation to them? Of course not. So why wouldn't you share some information that could save somebody money legally? rsrstudentloanhelp.com, rsrstudentloanhelp.com. And if you were listening to us in the last segment, you heard Scott share with us 4 or 5 different acronyms and programs that are out there. And I don't even remember all of them. I just know that they're there. I don't need to remember them. The bottom line is, I just showed somebody, one person how they didn't have to pay anything for their student loans. Yep. One person how they can go from $1,004 to $300 and change. Yep. And it takes 30 seconds to find that out. But let's find out a little bit more. Let's get a little more educated, because I know there's some of you that say, I want to know what's in every one of those vitamin D capsules that I get. Oh, no, I'll just take my vitamin D, right? Or I want it, I have no idea what's in the Body Armor or the Gatorade. I'll drink it. But, something like this, I need to know everything. So we're not going to tell you everything. But, Scott, tell us a little bit about all these different plans. And there was one I know that our friend sent out a video just the other day that said you can get your money back for payments between between March 2020 until August. but you have to go through this process before the end of this month. And I don't know anything about it, but I think if you go on rsrstudentloanhelp.com, they do.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. They do. They do. A lot of people were continuing to make payments after the administrative forbearance, and they're eligible to have that money refunded to them. Um, yeah, and I'm also not going to break down all of the student loan, all of the income-based programs, because it's just
Thank
based on
you.
different factors and different criteria. But what I will tell you, and this might not be popular with you or your audience, but the Department of Education under this administration has actually been doing some really, really good things. It was kind of in shambles. There were so many programs with so much criteria, and people weren't keeping track of things. I like the public service loan forgiveness program. I also like the teacher loan forgiveness program. And it basically says that if you go to school and you get a professional degree and then you decide to go into public service, if you make 10 years worth of payments, you can have your student loans paid back. Because most people that go into public service, they don't go there to make rich or to get rich. They're on fixed incomes, they're on salary scales, and they just, they don't have a lot of opportunities. So I think those are good programs. The biggest change
I'll
that
put on
people,
record, Scott. I agree with you. I think that we need those people to go out and do those public service jobs.
yeah.
And anything we can do to say thank you, I think that's a big hurrah. Let's do it.
Yeah, so there's a few things in the headlines that are confusing to people that I would like to have cleared up, or I'd like people to know that can be cleared up. One of them is we heard all over the headlines that 800,000 people, 804,000 people had their loans forgiven, their student loans forgiven. And that sounds impressive. The headline is good, but when you really get into the article and you get to where it's buried in the 19th paragraph, that was because of mismanagement of keeping track of payments. Those people have been making payments for over 20 years. And part of their payments weren't being applied to their forgiveness. And that represents 1.6% of all people that have student loans. It wasn't a big deal, but you see the headlines and people think, oh, well, I'm just going to have my loans forgiven. The other big challenging headline that came out is the SAVE plan. And the SAVE plan is a modification of the pay-as-you-earn program. And essentially what they did is they raised the income limit so that you could make more money and qualify for this pay-as-you-earn program. And they reduced the amount of your disposable income. So the calculation used to be, after all of your expenses, you have this disposable income payment. 10% of that was your payment. Well, that got reduced down to 5% from 10%. So increased the number of people that qualify for this program, lowered the calculation for their payment. I want to say, I heard Catalina say this from Loan Sense, that if you're a family of 3 or 4 and you make less than $70,000 a year, your payment's zero. So that's encouraging. That's encouraging. One of the challenges, though, is the administration came out and said, we're going to offer a grace period, right? There's a 12-month grace period. So if you can't make your payment, we're not going to report it to your credit report, which sounds like a great deal, right? But if you're trying to apply for a loan, or you're trying to refinance, or you're trying to buy a home, the underwriter is going to ask for your payment history. And if you're not making those payments, you're not going to get the loan. So it's important to understand the nuances of those things. And then the last thing that I would share here real quick, Ron, unless you want to interrupt me, the last thing I want to share is the Fresh Start program. And none of us benefit from this other than the consumer. None of us benefit from any of this stuff except for the consumer if you carry student loans. But the Fresh Start program, typically, if you were in default in your loans, you had to make 9 payments 9 months worth of payments before you get that mark removed from your credit that says it's derogatory, that's pulling down your credit score by 60 to 90 points. Now you can make payment arrangements, make one payment and have the credit report cleaned. That's a one-time use only, and it's only good for the next 12 months. It expires in September 2024. So those are some tools that I think that it's important to understand. You may qualify for a payment based off of your income, the income that's left over. You might not have a lot of income left over, so you might not have a lot of a payment. Stay away from private student loan debt consolidation, and understand the Fresh Start program, and understand that these programs have been expanded. So if you didn't qualify before, you might qualify now, and you should check.
That's a big issue right there, and I love you bringing in that information there, Scott, because so many of these things, we just don't know. And the one I've talked about many times is because we're based here in Southern California, and one of the biggest perpetrators that's really hurting people is the company that has their name all over our football stadium. Right, they're out there telling making boatloads of money, and I don't begrudge them for making money, because it might be somebody that needs that help. But the bottom line is, it would be much better if the people there had kind of like the reverse mortgage program, Scott, where before somebody could refinance their student loan debt, they had to go to an independent counselor. And I'm not a fan of government regulation, but when you got multi-million and billion-dollar companies out there praying and putting that clickbait out to an ignorant population, sometimes you need that help and you need that oversight. So as Scott put it earlier, don't go and something. I don't make any money if you go and get your student loans refinanced, or if you take the government programs that are out there that are already the law. Yeah. Our whole mission since 2010 on this radio program has been to educate you. And, if you want to still go and get that loan refinanced and do that damage to your family, more power to you. But if you want to go and take advantage of the law, the United States law that affects, like Scott just said, this SAVE plan, well, take advantage of the law, follow the law, and help your family. rsrstudentloanhelp.com, rsrstudentloanhelp.com. Cost you absolutely nothing to go there, check it out, get a free consultation. If you decide to retain them, fine. If you decide not to retain them, that's fine too. But the cost, from what I've seen so far, I haven't seen anybody that went to rsrstudentloanhelp.com that couldn't save money. And the retainer versus savings, I haven't seen anything that was less than a 1.5 month payoff. So the savings over 1.5 months was the cost of retaining them to do all the work for you and navigate the entire process. rsrstudentloanhelp.com. Scott, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing with us